Let me just say a few words about how Venezuela is being treated at the United Nations. Let me begin with the good. The Human Rights Council, to its credit, appointed an international fact-finding mission that, in September, found extremely important conclusions. And I quote from their report this September. They found, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that Venezuelan authorities and security forces have since 2014 planned and executed serious human rights violations, some of which, including arbitrary killings and the systematic use of torture, amount to crimes against humanity. I go on to quote, far from being isolated acts, these crimes were coordinated and committed pursuant to state policies with the knowledge or direct support of commanding officers and senior government officials. This is perhaps the most important statement ever delivered by the United Nations concerning the government of Nicolas Maduro. That is very good, and we're happy that the fact-finding mission was renewed for 2 years, and that we'll be hearing from them shortly in the Human Rights Council session that just began on Monday. Now, I wish it were only that. Unfortunately, there's also bad. At the Human Rights Council, a competing resolution was adopted, sponsored by Iran, which blames all of Venezuela's troubles on Western democracies for imposing sanctions against regime officials. That narrative that everything that's wrong with Venezuela is because of Western democracies and sanctions was recently promoted by a Human Rights Council expert. I'm referring to the Special Rapporteur on what's called unilateral coercive measures. This is a mandate created by Cuba to target Western countries, to make dictatorships look like victims. Alina Duhan, who's the Special Rapporteur, she visited Venezuela. One of the only experts that they allow to visit are those who are apologists for the regime, like a few years ago, when they welcomed Alfred de Zayas, the same apologist type of work, and she delivered a report saying that all of Venezuela's troubles are the fault of Western democracies. This was picked up immediately by Maduro when he addressed the Human Rights Council on Monday. He quoted from her, and you could see how propaganda from this Cuban-appointed expert was used by Maduro. So this is what's wrong with the council that needs to be addressed. And the fact that just a year ago, the General Assembly elected Maduro to the Human Rights Council. This is outrageous. And it's something you'll hear more about from Diego Aria, who heads our campaign to remove Venezuela. And it brings me to the General Assembly. What is the General Assembly doing on Venezuela? The General Assembly has adopted some resolutions on countries, one on Myanmar, one on Syria, one on Iran, but zero on Venezuela. Why is the General Assembly silent on Venezuela? More, why did the General Assembly elect Venezuela, and when will they act, as Ambassador Flores mentioned, under their mandate 60/251 to remove a member that commits gross and systematic abuses? We'll hear more about that from Diego Aria. Finally, I'll mention the Security Council. The Security Council should be dealing with a situation where millions, 5 million people have fled Venezuela, creating trouble across South, Central, and North America. This is an issue of international peace and security. Security Council should be addressing this as well. So I think there's a lot that the United Nations should be doing.